Welcome back to Front Row Cinema Club and episode 5 of my History of Horror series. This episode will cover the second half of the 1960s. Let's get right into it, there's so much to talk about. Previously on Front Row Cinema Club. They were joined by rival production companies such as Amicus and Tygon. Let's circle back to them later. It's time for that circling. Quick history lesson. Between 1642 and 1651, there was a civil war in England between the Roundheads, ugly men who looked like this, and the Cavaliers, who were probably just as ugly but who wore fabulous wigs. It's a really fascinating time in English history and ended up with Charles I having his head lopped off. During this turbulent period, people went mad for witch hunting. King James I, Headless Charlie's dad, even wrote a book on the subject called The Demonology. This book. Anyway, this is all the background knowledge you need for this film, Tygon's Witchfinder General, 1968. Vincent Price, he's back again, plays Matthew Hopkins, a real-life witch hunter responsible for having over 100 people executed during the Civil War. Made in conjunction with AIP, who you'll remember from my previous episode as being responsible for Corman's Poe cycle, this film was released in the US as The Conqueror Worm. This was to cash in on Corman's work, The Conqueror Worm being the name of an Edgar Allan Poe poem, to which the story of Witchfinder General has no connection. But anyway. Matthew Hopkins, deeply sadistic and driven by a quest for personal power rather than any real religious convictions, inflicts terrible torture on his powerless victims. Shocking in its time, Witchfinder General was subject to extensive censorship by the British Board of Film Censors. Critics received the film very poorly, though, like so many horror films, it was later lauded as a classic of the genre. The film's director, Michael Reeves, died months after its release, aged just 25, from an overdose. In 1966, Anton LaVey officially formed the Church of Satan, and 2 years later, two very different films would be released based on devil worship: The Devil Rides Out in Britain and Rosemary's Baby in the US. The Devil Rides Out is a Hammer production set during the 1920s. Christopher Lee plays the Duc de Richelieu, a rare goody character in his repertoire, who goes up against Satanic antagonist Mokata, played by Charles Gray. To modernise, the film can appear somewhat camp in its costuming and somewhat dated in its effects, but The Devil Rides Out is actually one of Hammer's most straight-faced efforts and was well received critically. The Devil Rides Out is certainly a cult classic known to horror fans. Rosemary's Baby, however, managed to cross over into mainstream pop culture knowledge. Perhaps this is partly due to its notorious director, Roman Polanski.
I'm going to save you. We'll go away together.
Where do you want us to go?
I don't know.
I won't get into his whole story here, partly because a lot of it I wouldn't be able to discuss on YouTube without having to censor myself. But, as most people will know, especially after the recent success of Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, in 1969, Polanski's wife, the actress Sharon Tate, was murdered by the Manson family. The topic of Satanism was inevitably brought up in connection with Tate's death, some people going so far as to claim Polanski was reaping what he'd sown by making films with such dark subject matter. The idea that Rosemary's Baby was a cursed film began to circulate, this no doubt helping to cement the legacy of the film as a dark classic. Upon the film's release, a year before the Manson family's gruesome attacks, Rosemary's Baby was hailed as one of the greatest horror films yet made. It tells the story of Rosemary, who moves into a beautiful apartment with her husband and quickly becomes pregnant. As months pass by, Rosemary begins to have increasingly bizarre encounters with her neighbours and starts to sense she is at the centre of something both mysterious and sinister. We've stuck squarely within the Anglosphere so far, but meanwhile in Japan we got the first inkling of what would come to be known in the 1990s as J-horror. The 60s in Japan is considered to be a golden age of cinema across a range of genres, horror being no exception. In Jigoku 1960, known as The Sinners of Hell in English, director Nobuo Nakagawa presents us with graphic scenes of torture in the underworld. The jidaigeki, meaning period drama, genre was combined with horror to produce such works as Kaidan, sometimes transliterated as Kwaidan 1964, and Kuroneko 1968. A personal favourite of mine from this period is 1964's Woman in the Dunes, the disturbing tale of a teacher who travels to a strange village amongst the sand dunes to research a beetle found only in that area. When night falls, he finds himself unable to return home.
Not since Dracula stalked the earth has the world known so terrifying a day or night.
It is I who renounce you.
In Europe, Mario Bava made his directorial debut with Black Sunday in 1960. In 1966, he would direct Kill Baby Kill. This was the beginning of the Giallo movement, a word that literally means yellow in Italian. The name for this movement, characterised by mysterious killers, eroticism, and a colourful mise-en-scène, comes from cheap mystery and horror books produced in Italy that had yellow covers.
It was from right over there. I jumped out at you from behind the tree, and Grandpa got all excited, and he shook his fist at me, and he said, "Boy, you be damned to hell." Remember that? Right over there. Well, you used to really be scared here.
Johnny,
You're still afraid.
stop it now. I mean it.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Returning to America, the last film I'll cover in this video is the one that I feel curbs off the 60s and welcomes in the 1970s, Night of the Living Dead. The first in George Romero's zombie series, Night of the Living Dead tells the story of a group of people trapped in a farmhouse, surrounded by the walking undead. The film's hero comes in the form of Ben, played by Dwayne Jones. Spoiler alert, skip ahead a minute or so if you don't want to hear the ending. After surviving the zombie horde, Ben is shot by a group of white men. Do they think he's a zombie, or are they taking an opportunity to kill a black man knowing they'll get away with it? Romero's ending is highly ambiguous. It's hard not to link this bleak finale to societal events at the time, however. When Night of the Living Dead premiered, children and teens across America were able to buy tickets without restriction, the MPAA film rating system having not yet been established. This resulted in audiences full of traumatised kids who'd gone in expecting something like this, and were subjected to this. Produced on a budget of $114,000, box office returns for Romero's grisly tale were a staggering $30 million. It was the highest grossing film across Europe in 1969. Finally, as we mark the death of Bela Lugosi in episode 3, we will now mark the death of Boris Karloff, star of Frankenstein, who died in February 1969. The death of the second classic horror icon of Universal's 1930s heyday. And so, the 1960s drew to a close. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe and share this video if you enjoyed it. Your support really helps a small channel like mine. What's your favourite 1960s horror film? As the decades go by, more and more work is produced and it gets harder and harder to even get close to talking about all the films I'd love to spend time on. Did I leave out your favourite? Let me know in the comments. Tune in next time for the 1970s, the decade where things just kept getting better for horror. And if you want to check out my other stuff, I do reviews, I do funny videos, go and look at my channel, Front Row Cinema Club. Thank you so much and see you next time. Goodbye.